He came to my workshop stranded, and by sunset I realized I was falling for him. I never expected a broken car to change my life. I'd been alone in the desert for weeks, the workshop all mine, clay under my nails, sand in my shoes, my hands shaping the silence into something I could call art. The sun was bleeding gold across the horizon, making the adobe walls glow like fire, and I thought the day couldn't get any more perfect in its quiet way. Then I heard it, a crunch of gravel, a sputtering engine, a curse carried by the wind. I looked up and there he was, leaning over the hood of his car, hood propped open like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Dirt on his boots, dust in his hair, and those eyes, sharp and green, scanning the desert as if he were both lost and daring someone to help. I swallowed, even though I hadn't intended to. My hands, sticky with clay, suddenly felt heavy. "Need a hand?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked up, surprised, like I had materialized from the sand itself. Yeah, I guess. Cars, not cooperating." I laughed softly and walked closer, the sun warming my back. He smelled faintly of motor oil and cedar wood, a mix that shouldn't have been so magnetic. "You're far from the road," I said. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Just wandering," he said, shrugging, a little embarrassed. "Until now, I thought the desert would be empty." I shook my head, unable to hide the smirk. "Empty, yes, but not lonely," I said. "And if you want, I can show you where emptiness meets clay." That's how it started. He watched me for a long moment, the way someone waits for permission before stepping into someone else's world. Then, almost shyly, he nodded. "I'd like that," he said. I led him through the small adobe studio, dust motes dancing in the last light, pots and sculptures lining the walls. "We start with the basics," I said, handing him a lump of clay. His fingers were awkward at first, tracing and pressing, and I could feel his tension and curiosity like a pulse in the room. "Not like painting," he murmured. "I didn't know you could feel like this with your hands." "Art's about touch," I said, leaning closer to adjust his grip. His hands brushed mine, just a moment, but the warmth of it spread through me like wildfire. I told myself it was nothing. Just clay, just light, just a stranger stranded in the desert. But the look in his eyes suggested otherwise. By the time the sun kissed the horizon goodnight, painting everything in orange and rose, we were silent, kneeling together in front of the wheel. The desert had gone still, the wind holding its breath, and I realized something I hadn't admitted before. I was noticing him. Not just his face, his hair, his hands, but the way he filled the space I thought only clay could. He looked at me then, green eyes reflecting the sunset. "This feels alive," he said. I smiled, but my heart was pounding. So did he know, or was it just the desert magic making us bold? "Do you think she's drawn to him because of his presence or because of the vulnerability he shows?" The night came soft and warm, desert air carrying the scent of sage and clay. We hadn't spoken much after the sun dipped below the horizon, but the silence was comfortable, electric even. His hands were still coated in clay, fingerprints pressed into the wheel, and I could feel the tension in him slowly melting under the desert sky. "I didn't expect to learn pottery today," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "Or to stay this long." His voice had a rough edge, like sand against stone, but it made me shiver. "You didn't think the desert could do this?" I teased, trying to hide my pulse, which had nothing to do with the clay. "Change people?" He laughed softly, a sound that made my chest ache. I guess I didn't expect to feel anything at all. I studied him as he worked, watching his hands press and smooth the clay, how he tilted his head when concentrating, the slight furrow in his brow. It was intimate in a way I hadn't anticipated. The desert was quiet around us, the only sounds the soft hum of the wind and our breathing. I realized that I was aware of every detail. The way his sleeve brushed against my arm, the warmth of him beside me, the faint scent of the desert clinging to him. "Do you always teach strangers?" he asked suddenly, glancing at me with a half smile. "Not usually, Ma'is," I said, pretending to be casual as my fingers lingered near his hand on the clay. "But you're different." The word slipped out before I could stop it, heavy and unavoidable. His eyes lifted, sharp and questioning. "Different how?" I didn't answer. I just let him notice the way I was watching him, the way I was leaning closer than necessary, my shoulder brushing his. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted slightly, his hand brushing mine. Just a touch, just enough to set something on fire in my chest. We worked in silence after that, the wheel spinning between us, but it was a quiet charge with more than clay. I felt every heartbeat, every brush of skin, and every shared glance like sparks across dry tinder. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and I couldn't imagine stepping away. Finally, he paused and looked up at me, green eyes glinting in the dim light. "You make this feel alive," he said, "like more than clay, like the desert itself has a pulse." I swallowed hard, my throat tight, my hands trembling slightly. "Maybe that's what happens when someone shows up unexpectedly in your world," I said, voice barely above a whisper. The wind shifted, carrying the desert night around us, and I realized the truth I hadn't admitted. I wanted him to stay. Not just tonight, not just for pottery, but here, always. I could feel the pull in my chest, undeniable and urgent, and I knew he felt it too. He leaned a fraction closer, just enough for the tension to thrum between us, just enough to make my pulse race. I didn't move away. I didn't pull back. The desert was holding its breath, and so were we, suspended in the moment that had nothing to do with clay and everything to do with longing. And I knew, in that still, burning desert night, that nothing would ever feel the same after this. Was the tension between them building naturally or too fast? The next morning, I woke before the sun, the desert light just brushing the horizon with gold. I didn't know why I felt restless, but every thought seemed tangled with him. His hands on the clay, his quiet laugh, the way he'd looked at me last night. I shook my head, trying to focus on my work, on the sculptures waiting for attention, but my pulse betrayed me. By the time I stepped into the studio, he was already there, kneeling over a piece of clay as though he'd been here all night, learning, practicing, and maybe even thinking about me. When he looked up, our eyes met and the world contracted. The desert, the sun, the studio, even the air between us. It all seemed to vanish until it was just us, the clay, and the unspoken heat that hung heavy. Morning, he said softly, his voice low and steady. Morning, I replied, trying to hide the tremor in my hands. My pulse felt like it was echoing across the desert floor. We worked side by side in silence at first, letting the clay guide us, the wheel spinning like a heartbeat between us. And then he leaned over slightly, adjusting the curve of a piece I'd been struggling with, and I felt the brush of his arm against mine. It was electric. A jolt ran through me and I froze, not because I wanted him to stop, but because every nerve in my body had suddenly awakened. You're precise, he murmured, not looking at me, just at the clay. I didn't think anyone could teach me so much so quickly. Maybe you're just willing to learn, I whispered, my fingers brushing his again as I repositioned the clay. He turned then, finally meeting my gaze, and I felt like he could see right into the parts of me I usually kept hidden. His green eyes weren't just watching, they were searching, noticing, lingering. It was like he was mapping the space between us, exploring the possibilities in a moment that should have been fleeting. I feel like I could stay here forever, he admitted quietly, his breath catching just slightly. With you. Just like this. My chest tightened, my hands trembling, not from clay but from the truth in his words. I wanted that too. More than anything I'd felt in months, years even. I wanted to lose track of time with him, to let the desert swallow everything else, and to let him in completely. But the moment was fragile, dangerous. He wasn't just a visitor in the desert. He was a stranger who could leave, a heart that could vanish with the setting sun. I swallowed hard, my pulse thrumming in my ears, and whispered, We'll see. He nodded, understanding the weight behind my words, and we returned to our work, hands occasionally brushing, glances lingering too long, the tension between us rising with the sun. It was almost unbearable, the heat between us, the longing we couldn't yet name aloud. When the sun hit its peak, we stepped outside to watch the desert stretch into infinity, and for the first time, I realized that this stranger, this unexpected visitor, had carved a space in my heart I didn't want to fill with anything else. The desert had brought him to me, and I was helpless to resist. Was the tension between them more about physical closeness or emotional connection? The late afternoon sunlight poured through the studio windows, casting long shadows across the clay-covered floor. He was kneeling at the wheel, hands shaping a bowl, eyes focused, lips slightly parted. I watched him from across the room, pretending to concentrate on my own sculpture, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Every movement he made felt deliberate, magnetic, like the desert itself was guiding him closer to me. Here, let me show you a different technique, he said suddenly, his voice low, warm. I could feel it in my chest in the way my heart stuttered. He moved closer, kneeling beside me, his thigh brushing mine. I froze, not out of discomfort, but because the contact ignited something I couldn't name. Like this, he murmured, guiding my fingers over the clay, his touch lingering a second too long. I swallowed, aware of the electricity in that simple gesture. My hand trembled slightly and he noticed, his green eyes lifting to meet mine. There was something in that look, a question, a promise, a challenge. You feel that? He whispered. The clay, the desert, the moment? I nodded, but my voice caught. Yes. The air between us thickened, charged with an energy I hadn't felt in years. Every brush of his skin against mine made my pulse spike, and I realized how desperately I wanted more. Not just his touch, but his attention, his presence, his understanding. We worked together in silence after that, our hands occasionally brushing, our knees almost touching, the proximity making the simple act of shaping clay feel like something intimate, almost forbidden. I couldn't help stealing glances at him, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the shadow his lashes cast on his cheek, the way his fingers flexed as they molded the clay. Finally, he paused, stepping back and wiping his hands on a cloth. It's almost time for the sunset, he said, but there was a hesitation in his voice, a weight I didn't understand at first. Then he added, Do you want to see it from the dunes? I hesitated, my mind racing. Alone with him in the desert, the sun dipping low, the sky turning orange and pink, it was intoxicating, terrifying, irresistible. And yet, I nodded, unable to say no. We walked in silence across the warm sand, our footsteps shallow and careful, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The dunes stretched around us, a sea of gold, and when we reached the top, he didn't speak. He just stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body, the tension in the air so thick it made my stomach flutter. The sun hovered at the horizon, casting everything in firelight. He turned slightly toward me, his gaze holding mine, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The desert was silent, the world reduced to this one perfect electric instant, and I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. Was the tension between them more powerful because of touch or shared quiet moments? The desert night wrapped around us like a velvet cloak, stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of sage and dry sand, and I felt a nervous thrill in my chest. We hadn't spoken since the sun had slipped below the horizon. Somehow the silence felt heavier, electric, loaded with everything neither of us dared to say. He shifted closer, and I felt the warmth of him brushing against me. Not intentionally, I think, but deliberately enough to send shivers down my spine. I couldn't look at him directly at first, afraid that if I did, I'd betray everything my heart had been holding back. But I felt his gaze, steady and patient, like he could read me without words. You're quiet, he said finally, his voice low, almost intimate. I was thinking, I admitted, letting my hands drift over the clay in my lap even though we weren't working. My fingers traced the contours absent-mindedly, a way to anchor myself to something tangible as my pulse raced. Thinking about what? He asked, his tone teasing yet soft, careful, as though afraid to provoke too much. About you, I whispered, barely audible, but the words carried across the night between us. He froze, his hand hovering in the air for a split second before resting it lightly on the clay beside mine. That simple touch made my whole body tingle. Me? His voice caught slightly, a breath of disbelief and longing all at once. I nodded, not looking at him, letting the silence do what words couldn't. He didn't move closer, didn't speak. He simply let the moment linger, as though it were sacred, as though acknowledging it too quickly might shatter something fragile. Then he exhaled, a soft laugh that was half relief and half something else, something that made my heart twist painfully. I've been thinking about you too, he admitted, his hand brushing against mine again, lighter this time, teasing, testing, and I felt the charge spike. I wanted to close the distance, to lean into him, to let him feel how much I had longed for this connection, this presence, this dangerous kind of closeness that made the desert feel alive, and alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. But I didn't move. I stayed rooted, trembling, because I didn't want to scare him, didn't want to break the fragile line between friendship and something more. The wind stirred around us, carrying the faint sound of distant coyotes and the whisper of the dunes. He turned slightly toward me, eyes reflecting the last glimmers of sunset still clinging to the horizon. I don't want to rush anything, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I don't want to hold back either. I swallowed hard, my heart racing so fast I thought he could hear it. Neither do I whispered back, letting my fingers brush his deliberately this time, letting him feel the truth I had been holding close for hours, for days, maybe for years. We sat together like that for a long while, fingers touching, shoulders brushing, the desert stretching endlessly around us, and for the first time, I understood that sometimes the quietest gestures are the most dangerous, the most thrilling, the most real. Because in this desert, under the fading orange sky, we were beginning to unravel, to ignite, to find something that neither of us could deny. Was her confession too early, or was it perfect timing for this slow burn romance? The next morning, the desert sun was already warm against my skin when I stepped outside. The wind carried the familiar scent of sage and dust, and for a moment I thought I could still feel his hand against mine from the night before. I shook my head, telling myself not to get carried away, but it was impossible. The memory lingered like a spark in the dry air, impossible to ignore. He was there, leaning against the workshop wall, arms crossed, hair ruffled by the breeze. When he saw me, his lips curved into a small smile, the kind that made me forget to breathe. "You're early," he said. "I could say the same about you," I replied, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. My hands itched to reach out to touch him again, just to be sure he was real. We moved to the wheel together, working in silence at first, our hands brushing over clay, fingers slipping over curves, pressure light, teasing, charged. Every glance he gave me felt like a secret he didn't want to share with the world, but couldn't resist showing me. "You're different from anyone I've met," he said finally, his voice low and honest, almost trembling. "I didn't think I'd find someone like this out here." "Different how?" I asked, though I already knew. My pulse raced as I felt him shift slightly closer, our knees brushing under the table, the heat between us building. "Alive," he whispered. "You make the desert alive." I swallowed, heat rising to my cheeks. "I think you make me alive too," I admitted, letting my fingers linger against his as I smoothed a piece of clay. His eyes lifted to mine, searching, questioning, daring me to go further. For a moment, I imagined leaning into him, letting my lips brush his, letting the desert witness what I'd been holding back. But instead, I stayed quiet, letting the tension grow, letting him feel the charge, the pull, without forcing it into words or actions. Finally, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His fingers lingered at my cheek, warm, soft, deliberate. I leaned into the touch, closing my eyes, letting the desert wind and his presence fill me. "I've been scared," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Scared that this, whatever this is, would end too quickly, or that I'd ruin it." "You won't," I whispered, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound steady. "We'll figure it out. Together." He smiled, small and hesitant, but it was enough to make my chest ache. Then, just as the sun climbed higher and burned brighter, he leaned closer, close enough that I could feel his breath against my lips. Not a kiss, not yet, but a promise that this slow burn we'd been nurturing was about to ignite. And I knew, in that moment, that nothing in the desert would ever be the same, should she let him kiss her now or keep the tension building. The afternoon heat settled over the workshop like a soft, heavy blanket, but I barely noticed. Every movement, every glance, every slight brush of his hand against mine made my pulse race in ways I couldn't name. We were side by side at the wheel, shaping the clay, our hands meeting and separating with a rhythm that felt almost like a dance. "I've never met anyone who understands clay and silence the way you do," he said softly, leaning over to adjust my fingers on a piece I was working on. His hand lingered near mine, close enough to ignite a fire I couldn't contain. "You make it easy," I admitted, letting my voice tremble just a little. I couldn't look at him directly. My eyes were drawn to the way his fingers flexed, the way the sunlight caught his hair, the warmth radiating from his body. It was maddening, intoxicating, and I hated that I couldn't hide it. He straightened and glanced at me, his green eyes searching mine like he was daring me to admit what I felt. "You're different," he whispered, almost reverently. "You make everything feel urgent, alive." I swallowed hard, heat climbing my neck. "I think you do too," I murmured. My fingers brushed his deliberately, lingering, and I felt him tense beneath my touch. A thrill ran through me. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the desert around us. He leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine. The closeness was maddening. My breath caught. I wanted to lean into him, wanted to feel the weight of him pressing closer, wanted to let go of every restraint. But I hesitated, letting the tension build, letting him feel the pull as intensely as I did. He exhaled slowly, a quiet laugh that was more nervous than amused. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "Being this close, feeling this." "You're doing fine," I whispered, letting my fingers slide over his hand again. The subtle contact, the warmth, the electricity, it was more than words could express. He shifted, and suddenly we were standing side by side at the edge of the workshop, looking out at the desert. The dunes stretched endlessly under the burning sky, orange and gold fading into violet at the horizon. He glanced at me, green eyes intense, and I felt my chest tighten. "I don't want to rush anything," he said, voice low, almost a plea. "But I also can't hold back." I felt my stomach flutter, pulse racing, and I realized I had been waiting for him to say that. "Neither can I whispered. For a moment, we just stood there, side by side, the desert wind carrying unspoken promises, the clay in our hands a bridge between us. I could feel every heartbeat, every shiver, every longing that neither of us could contain any longer. And then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned closer, the heat of him brushing my hair, our breaths mingling. Not a kiss, not yet. Just a prelude, a promise that the moment was coming, a silent acknowledgement of the fire that had been building between us since the first touch. The desert held its breath with us. Should she finally let the tension break into a kiss, or keep the slow burn going? The evening arrived with a softness that made the desert glow like fire. The sun had melted into the horizon, leaving streaks of gold and violet across the sky, and the workshop was bathed in the warm afterglow. I could feel the tension in my chest as I watched him move around the studio, his presence commanding yet gentle, every glance directed at me carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. I never thought I'd enjoy being stranded, he said suddenly, leaning against the doorframe, dust on his boots, sleeves rolled up. But I'm glad I did. I smiled, fingers still coated in clay. Glad you broke down? I teased softly, though my heart thumped in a rhythm I couldn't control. Yes, he admitted, eyes lingering on me, because I got to meet you. The words hit me like the desert wind, unexpected and fierce. I swallowed hard, my fingers twitching, desperate to touch him again, to let him know I felt the same, though the words were too heavy to speak aloud. He stepped closer, and the warmth of him brushed against me. My breath caught, pulse quickening. I wanted to step back, to deny the pull, but I couldn't. Every fiber of me was drawn to him, to the brush of his hand, the proximity of his body, the intensity of his gaze. Show me more, he murmured, nodding toward the clay. Teach me. I handed him a fresh lump, and we knelt together at the wheel, our hands meeting over the spinning clay again. This time, the contact wasn't accidental. Every movement, every touch was deliberate, charged. I felt the heat radiating from him, felt the pulse of his breath, and it made my skin tingle, every nerve alive. You're amazing, he whispered, fingers brushing mine. I don't think I've ever felt this way before. Neither have I admitted softly, letting my hand linger against his, tracing his fingers, the backs of his hands. The subtle contact made my chest ache. It was dangerous but thrilling, and I couldn't pull away. The desert night wrapped around us, silent except for the faint hum of the wind and the spin of the wheel. He leaned slightly closer, his shoulder brushing mine, and I felt the electricity jump between us. Every glance, every fleeting touch, every unspoken word made the heat between us unbearable. I don't want this to end, he said quietly, eyes locked on mine, even for a moment. Then it won't, I whispered, heart pounding. My voice trembled, but my resolve was clear. I wanted him here. I wanted this. I wanted everything we were building in this desert, this slow fire, to continue without fear. For a long moment, we stayed close, fingers intertwined over the clay, bodies brushing just enough to ignite longing, and I realized the desert was no longer empty. It was alive with us, with the unspoken desire, the tension, the undeniable pull that neither of us could resist. And as the last light faded from the sky, I knew the night ahead would change everything. Should they give in to their desire tonight, or keep the slow burn going? The desert night was alive with stars scattered like sparks across an endless black canvas. I could feel the heat of him even before I turned, the tension between us undeniable, heavy in the warm air. The workshop was quiet, the clay still damp on our hands, the wheel spinning like a heartbeat syncing with ours. He stepped closer, the space between us shrinking with each second. I wanted to step back, to resist, but my body betrayed me. Every nerve, every fiber, every thought was tuned to him. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, intense, searching, and it made my pulse hammer like I'd never felt before. I can't stop thinking about you, he said, voice low, almost a growl, carrying desire and uncertainty in equal measure. His fingers brushed mine, deliberate, lingering, and I gasped softly, caught in the sudden fire that had been building for days. You don't have to, I whispered, letting my hand rest against his. The touch was fleeting, teasing, enough to ignite the fire in my chest without giving it all away. My heart was pounding, my breath uneven, but I couldn't move away. I didn't want to. He leaned slightly closer, and I felt the heat radiate off him. The smell of the desert, of sweat and clay, and something uniquely him filled my senses. My hands trembled as I placed them over his, guiding the clay together, letting our fingers intertwine naturally, urgently. You make everything feel so alive, he murmured, green eyes dark, searching mine. I've never felt this way. I swallowed hard, my lips dry. Neither have I admitted, voice barely audible, trembling with the truth. I don't want to pretend anymore. The air around us thickened, charged with desire and unspoken longing. He took a tentative step closer until our bodies brushed fully, every nerve sparking, every heartbeat synchronized. I could feel the tremor in him as clearly as my own. I've waited, he whispered, voice low and rough, waited for this, for you. The honesty hit me like the desert wind cutting through the stillness, raw and undeniable. I wanted him to take my hand, to hold me, to finally cross the line we had danced around for so long. I didn't need words. The desert itself seemed to lean in, holding its breath with us. We were inches apart now, hearts pounding, breaths mingling. I tilted my head slightly, feeling the pull, the magnetic force drawing us together, and for the first time, I let go of the hesitation that had held me back. The wheel spun slowly beneath our hands, a heartbeat echoing the rhythm of our tension. And in that suspended moment, I knew nothing could remain the same. We were on the edge of surrender, poised between longing and fulfillment, and I wanted him to cross that line with me. The desert night was witness to everything, the desire, the fear, the electricity, and I realized that what we had built in days could no longer stay confined to clay and stolen touches. Something had to give. Should they finally give in to their desire or continue the slow burn a little longer? The desert was quiet, the stars stretching endlessly above us, mirrored by the stillness in the workshop. I could feel him before I even looked, his presence pressing close, magnetic, impossible to ignore. The clay from earlier was still damp on our hands, the wheel spinning slowly, but nothing mattered except the space between us, charged with tension, desire, and anticipation. He stepped closer, fingers brushing my arm deliberately, igniting a thrill that ran straight to my chest. I didn't move away. I couldn't. I wanted this, had wanted it from the moment he appeared, from the way he had stepped into my quiet, carefully contained life, shattering it with something I couldn't name, something I didn't want to hide anymore. I can't stop thinking about you, he whispered, voice low, tremulous, raw. His green eyes held mine, searching, daring, holding promises that made my pulse spike. I've been waiting too, I admitted, letting my hands brush against his, fingers tracing patterns on the clay, intertwining almost by instinct. The contact was electric, every nerve alive, every heartbeat syncing with his. He leaned closer, the warmth of him pressing against me. My breath caught as the distance evaporated. The desert seemed to hold its breath with us, the wind still, the stars watching silently as we stood on the edge of surrender. I've never felt this way, he murmured, voice rough with longing. You make everything feel alive, everything feel possible. Then don't hold back, I whispered, voice shaking with anticipation. Let it happen. His hand cupped my cheek, warm, deliberate, tender, and I tilted my head toward him, closing the final gap. Our lips met in a kiss soft at first, exploratory, hesitant, as though testing the boundaries of what we'd been holding back. Then, as the desert night wrapped around us, it deepened, urgent, consuming, every ounce of longing and desire, finding release in that single, perfect moment. I felt his hands move to my waist, pulling me closer, and I pressed against him, letting go of the restraint that had held me captive. The world narrowed to the two of us, the clay, the wheel, the desert sky stretched infinitely above, witness to our surrender. We broke apart just slightly, breathing heavily, foreheads touching, eyes locked. I think we've been waiting for this, he whispered, voice soft but intense. Yes, I breathed, heart pounding. For this, for us. The desert wind stirred, carrying the warmth of the night, the faint scent of sage and sand, and I realized that nothing would ever be the same. We had crossed the line from longing to fulfillment, from tension to release, from strangers to something unbreakable. As we held each other, watching the stars reflect in his eyes, I knew the desert had brought more than art, more than quiet, more than sunrises and sunsets. It had brought him, and I would never let him go. The clay spun slowly beneath our intertwined hands, a reminder that creation, like love, takes patience, care, and courage, and that some fires, once lit, burn forever. Was the slow burn worth the wait, or should they have confessed earlier?